Lyddie, Chapter 15, Part 2, Rachel. We're going to begin at page 122 at the bottom, last paragraph. She could hardly keep her mind on her work. What was the use of it all anyway, if the farm was gone? But it couldn't be, not after all her sweating and saving. And what would she do with Rachel? The child hadn't spoken a word since arrival. She hadn't even cried. She seemed more dead than alive, and precious time must be spent finding her a place to stay, and precious money put out for her keep, more if she was to go to school. Why couldn't the child work in the spinning room? There were Irish children down there who looked no older than 7 or 8. They were earning their own way. Hadn't Lyddie herself been working hard since she was no more than a tadpole? And doffing wasn't as hard as farm work. Why, those children hardly worked 15 minutes out of the hour, just taking off the full spools and replacing them with empty ones. Then they just sat in the corner and they played or they chattered. Sometimes from the window or on a clear day, Lyddie had seen them running about the mill yard, playing tag or marble. It was an easy life compared to the farm. Still, Rachel would be out of mischief and earning her own way. As if she hadn't trouble enough, Bridget was crying again. Lyddie glanced over at the loom. Everything seemed in order, but the Irish girl was standing there, staring at the shuddering machine, with tears running down her cheeks. Lyddie quickly checked her own looms before walking over and saying in the girl's ear, "What's the matter with you, eh?" Bridget looked around, startled. She bit her lip and shook her head. Lyddie shrugged. It was just as well if the girl learned to bear her own troubles. Mr. Marston stopped Lyddie at the stairs on the way to breakfast. Her heart nodded. How could he have heard about Rachel already? Had one of the girls tattled so soon? They were jealous of her, Lyddie knew. She was the best operator on the floor. But it was not about Rachel that Mr. Marston wished to speak. It was about that wretched Irish girl. You must tell her, he said, that she must get her speed up. I can't keep her on, even as a spare hand, unless she can maintain a proper pace. Why didn't you tell her himself? He was the overseer. Bridget did not belong to her. He hadn't asked for a spare hand. She hadn't asked for a spare hand, hadn't wanted one, and now he was trying to shove the responsibility off on her. She spoke to Bridget after the break. He says you'll have to speed up or he can't keep you on. The girl's eyes widened in fear, reminding Lyddie, oh, cuss it, of Rachel's silent face as the child sat crouched within herself in the corner of Mrs. Bedloe's kitchen. "Oh, tarnation," she hollered in Bridget's ears. "I'll help you. We'll do the 5 looms together for a few days, just till you get on better, eh?" The girl smiled faintly, still frightened. "And keep your mind on your bloomin' work, you hear? We can't have you catching your hair or being hit in the head by a flying shuttle because because your mind is someplace else." Fresh tears started in the girl's eyes, but she bit her lip again and nodded. Lyddie could see Diane smiling approvingly. Good thing she couldn't hear her. Hear me, Lyddie thought wryly. She wouldn't be thinking I was so kindly then. By the 7 o'clock bell, Bridget was looking a little less distraught, and Mr. Marston came past to pat both girls proudly. Lyddie sighed and hardly bothered to dodge him. She had gotten off the fewest pieces in one day since she had 4 looms, and she still had to go home to the burden of silent little Rachel. "Well, it won't do," said Mrs. Bedloe. "She won't talk to either Tim or me, not a word, just sits trembling in the corner like a frozen mouse." "Did she manage to eat anything?" "Did she manage to eat? She eats like she hasn't had food in a month of Sundays. I fed her with Tim. She out-ate him. And he's a growing boy, but never a word through it all. Just shovels it in like there'd never been another plateful this side of the grave." Lyddie looked at the housekeeper's face, pinched with anger, and then down at the top of Rachel's head. The child was trembling, like Oliver. She thought, like Oliver. "For more, that boy will be hung. I know that boy will be hung." "Oh, Rachie, I don't want to think of you hungry." "I'll pay you more," she promised Mrs. Bedloe. "It isn't the money." But it was quite clear to Lyddie that it was indeed the money in addition to the risks, so Lyddie vowed to fetch payment from the bank the very next day. She had to buy time, at least until she heard from Charlie. When she had finished her own supper, she fetched Rachel from the kitchen. took her out to the privy, and then led her by hand up the staircase to the bedroom. All of this was accomplished with neither of them saying a word aloud, although inside Lyddie's head lengthy conversations were bouncing about, and as she tucked the quilt about the child, she tried some of her practiced lines aloud. "What did you do today, Rachie? Did Tim make you do some schoolwork? Ain't Mrs. Bedloe funny? She's all right, eh? Just scared to break a rule. We got to do what the corporation says, you know, 'cause if we don't, we're out of a job, and then what would we do, eh?" There was no answer. She hadn't expected any still. "You mustn't be worried, Rachie. Judah can't sell the farm. Charlie and me, we won't let him. We're keeping it for Papa." Was there a flicker of light in her eyes? "And Mama? And Charlie and Rachel and Lyddie, too." Did she just imagine the child had relaxed a little against the pillow? Or was it a trick of the candle light? Maybe if she read aloud, as Betsy had to her. She opened Oliver Twist and commenced. When Rachel fell asleep, she didn't know. Lyddie was lost in the comfort of the familiar words, and when the bell rang, she blew out the candle and lay in the darkness, feeling the presence of the small body nearby. What could she do? Where could she turn for help? She couldn't help Rachel here, and yet Lyddie must live in a corporation house to keep her job, and without her job, what good could she do for any of them? But how could she put this little lost child out with strangers? She cursed her aunt and uncle. What could they have been thinking of to bring this child here? And yet, wasn't she better off here with Lyddie, who loved her, than with those two who must not have given her enough to eat? Poor little Rachel. Poor old Lyddie. She heaved herself over in bed. She had to sleep. There was nothing she could do until she heard from Charlie. Surely Charlie could stop Judah from selling the farm, and then, debt or no debt, she'd take Rachel home. Let them try to get her off the land again. Just let them try. In her uneasy sleep, she saw the bear again. But suddenly, in the midst of his clumsy thrashing about, he threw off the pot and was transformed, leaping like a spring buck up into the loft where they were huddled, and she could not stare him down. And that is the end of chapter 15. Keep on reading.